Hi there and welcome to The Real Agenda with me, Tom Burgess. Thanks for joining us, and as the talk and the media stories go back to how much economies are growing or expected to grow post-pandemic, the question remains, why growth? Or indeed, is it, yes, we want growth, but not just economic growth? It is growth in well-being that really matters to all people. Economic growth on its own discards those that are not or cannot be part of it, mostly through no fault of their own, and it causes inequalities which get worse as economic growth increases. But it need not be this way. Is it time that we've brought everyone together and we grow the economy focused on growing well-being for the good of us all, not just the privileged few? I'm wanting to find out what we can do to bring growth in well-being in our economy. So I asked Michael Weatherhead, who's the organisation and projects lead at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, to explain. I started by asking Michael, what's the problem with our economy?
So, Tom, I think a key problem for the economy, or the way that we view the economic system, is an unquestioning devotion to growth, really a growth at all costs. It's a problem because it's creating a widening inequality. It's certainly creating high levels of insecurity, sort of indicators of despair and loneliness. Trust in institutions are falling. So a lot of this is being driven by the needs that sort of this unquestioning devotion to growth results in. Now, that's, of course, not to recognize that growth hasn't improved the lives of many. But the problem is that we've been working against the planet in benefiting certain sections of the population. So, we're arriving at a sixth mass extinction. Pretty frightening stuff, because if you think of, say, COVID as a kind of a wave washing over you on the beach, it's a ripple compared to, say, climate change, which in turn is not as frightening or scary a size wave as biodiversity loss. So we've really not been sort of going with the grain in terms of what nature can support and provide us with, and it's a big, big problem. Another key way of thinking about the economy and why the system's really not working at the moment is that, yes, growth in GDP is required to fund services that people need, but more and more of those services the government's spending their money on are now on services that are needed to fix the harm of the current system. So it's almost like failure demand is growing as a result of this sort of focus of the economic system as it is at the moment.
So we're actually papering over the cracks that we're causing.
It is a bit sticking plasters. It's all that sort of deal with the issue after you've created the problem, as opposed to go upstream and try and not create the negative outcomes in the first place.
So what is a well-being economy?
A well-being economy is really an economy, we're fair weather friends of growth. We're not sort of slavish devotees, if you like. So, for example, as we move to an economy which has to be carbon neutral very, very quickly, there will be growth in certain sectors of the economy. Of course there will be, and that's fine for it to be. The thing is, there simply has to be a contraction in other parts of the economy, those parts of the economy which are causing real damage at the moment. But instead of having GDP as your North Star, what we're looking for is an economy that sort of meets 5 real well-being economy needs, if you like. And we've summarized those in terms of dignity, so everyone having enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. Fairness, and so justice really in all its dimensions at the heart of the economic system. The gap between the richest and the poor is greatly reduced. Connection. I mentioned before some of the problems. There's huge levels of loneliness, despair, isolation. We need connection again, and we need our economy to support that. People having a sense of belonging in all institutions, really serving the common good. But this can't be just sort of given to us, if you like. We need to be active participants. So participation is another of those 5 dimensions. Citizens actively engaged in their communities and locally rooted economies. And then, of course, rounding all of that off is this is a well-being economy of people and the planet. We need nature. We have to restore. We need to go beyond this sort of term sustainability. We need to move into a restorative state where we're, in fact, helping and supporting, sometimes just getting out of the way of nature recovering from the damage that we've caused. So really an economy that's replacing GDP as the North Star with with these kind of 5 needs. And, we fleshed out through our work what that actually looks like in practice. But as I said, those 5 being dignity, fairness, connection, participation, and nature.
Now, the thing with GDP and all its faults is it's a method of measuring. So how do we measure against performance on your 5 principles?
With the Wellbeing Economy and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, what we look to do is sort of put out a North Star there, but we don't attempt to be hugely prescriptive, both in terms of what it exactly looks like or in the pathways by which we need to get there. But if we think through what these actually look like, if we think about nature, then obviously we need to be in the zero carbon space, but we also need to be seeing the restoration of biodiversity. And there are various metrics already out there. Ecological footprint is a complex metric, which is a good one for actually measuring land use and how healthy land use is. So if we take, for example, nature, carbon reduction down to net zero, as well as an improvement in mean species biodiversity measures is a critical element. In terms of fairness, there are some simple metrics that already exist in the economics world, such as the Gini coefficient, which looks at inequality. But we can also look at issues around participation, levels of participation, dignity in the workplace. This is particularly topical in the UK at the moment, Tom, what with Uber having lost their court case around whether or not they can treat drivers as employees or not. There's a whole issue around fairness, dignity, the rights of the employer in that space that needs to be considered. So, in terms of jobs, and this is often what gets thrown back, whatever, you're anti this, you're anti. No, we're not. We're about high quality, well-being jobs. So jobs which give people dignity. So, those are the sort of metrics that one would look to use. But we don't want to force anyone down a particular pathway in terms of this is the only metric, because different places, different contexts, different requirements.
So, this is obviously great, and I'm completely behind you on this, but why has it not happened? Why are we still doing the same thing that's destroying our planet and, making more people more unequal?
I think as a species, we are a little risk averse, firstly. So, stepping into the new can be quite scary. And often we find, and it's been shown historically, that sort of significant events, ruptures, if you like, in the sort of flow of things need to occur for us to really take a leap forward. It's interesting how, in the UK, if we take the UK example, that, for example, and this is particularly pertinent with the pandemic that we're in at the moment, after the sort of Spanish flu of 1918, 1919, we didn't see any sort of significant change. We actually saw a significant change after World War II. But that's not to say the pandemics can't be an impact, can't be a reason for change. Things have changed. And I can't remember the study that I was looking at, but there are sort of 4 events that have been identified by this author I'm thinking of, but can't place, which have actually led to ruptures in society, which have led to progressive change. And in the case, it's interesting at this particular moment that, of course, we all suffered this financial crisis of 2008, 13 years ago, but we didn't see the change that we hoped to in the economic system. And yet with the pandemic now, we are perhaps starting to see a real shift in the way that the economic mainstream is considering what is possible, because we've had a few of these big changes, but not for a little while. We had a large change after the Second World War towards Keynesianism. We also then had that shift towards neoliberalism at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. So I think we're at that point now where it's quite exciting in a way, because we have the climate forcing the hand, needing for us to get towards net zero, but we also are exploring sort of the possibilities of doing economics differently, because the pandemic has highlighted that the inequalities that were already there have been exacerbated even further.
So we've got a unique opportunity now to readjust after the pandemic. We've already seen that with the change in how people are working from home, more people want to do that. That's just one aspect. Hopefully there'll be other aspects. Hopefully we'll be more compassionate. Hopefully a lot of things will happen. But how can we make the change happen? Still, the politicians, and even for that matter, the electorate, don't fully comprehend the opportunities. How are we going to make these changes happen?
Well, at the sort of higher level, we need to as I said before, we need to be a fair weather friend of growth, not a devoted follower. We also need to sort of recognize the limits of the market. We can't be a slavish devotee to the market as well. It can't necessarily find all the solutions. And as I said, we're starting to see signals that these things are starting to shift. I mean, you saw that the US Treasury Secretary talking about the need for a global minimum corporation tax. This was just not on the agenda for decades. And so to bring in this and additional taxes for those multinationals that have done particularly well, almost out of solidarity, this kind of language coming out of the IMF or coming out of the White House is not the language that we've seen over the past sort of 30, 40 years. But I mean, specifically, what are we doing? What can we do about it? Well, we've identified 3 key areas that we think are necessary to help sort of move this forward. Firstly, it's the creation of sort of positive and empowering new narratives. There's been plenty of narratives sort of articulating what's wrong with neoliberalism. And I think even those who have defended neoliberalism in the past are really struggling to defend it now. It doesn't have the solutions to the problems that we currently face. So pushing out more and positive, empowering new narratives that people can recognize themselves in and want to be a part of is critical, because it shifts the Overton window. It shifts the sort of policy possibility space that politicians can step into. But those politicians also need to be supported, because they're not necessarily practiced at doing different types of policy making or different types of policies. And they also need to be made aware of some of the exciting solutions and ideas that already exist, but often at the micro scale and need more visibility, more amplification for them to be taken on board, replicated, scaled up, if you like. So quite concretely, what we do is we look to create new and empowering narratives. We look to curate existing solutions and ideas, and we look to sort of act as the kind of arrows between the players and the layers, if you like, bringing all of these things together in order to sort of support those who set the architecture of the system, the rules of the game, if you like, help them to start shifting those rules of the game.
I know, and I think one of the things, touching on your earlier point about the corporate tax, that has happened, and when actually somebody steps up and says something, they traditionally think, a lot of people are going to be against. Actually, they're not. So, we get the situation where, as you said, in the States, they talked about raising corporate income tax, and even the situation where there was going to be increased taxes. I think Jeff Bezos said, he was actually supporting this. And so actually people do support, if a politician stand up and be bold and say, this is what we're going to do because it's good for everybody, people actually say, oh, yeah, but they're too frightened that the rich and the vested interests are going to, push it down. So,
well, there are a lot of vested interests, and we can't sort of ignore the fact that there is inertia in the system because certain parts of society have done very well out of the existing system. And there is this sort of individualistic narrative that has been pushed for so many decades that it is ingrained in the way that we think about the economy and the way that we think about success, that it's individual, it's not actually as a result of the entire sort of support mechanism, nor the fact that we're naturally a collaborative species more than we are necessarily a competitive one. That's not saying one over the other, but, over the past, what is now 40 years or so, that sort of one has dominated the other. And if you like, as this sort of singular sort of individualistic business success has almost sort of overtaken the other spheres of society. If you think of society in sort of 3 different ways, sort of the governance, the business, and the cultural, you see sort of this sort of business approach permeate all of those. And any system which is out of balance, as it has become, is not a healthy system. And that's where we are. But I'm seeing those kind of messages. And as you say, one person says it and they find out that the world doesn't fall apart once they've said it. In fact, mainly people say, yes, no, we agree with you. Then that emboldens people. And that's in part, Tom, why we've made a point of working with those who are more open to change, and also with the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership, which we all help catalyse, working with governments, Scotland, New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, Wales, those governments who are actually open to doing things differently and supporting them to continue to be brave and to continue to lead the charge, if you like, because that sets examples for others who perhaps are a bit more timid and gives them the sort of license to step forward as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just tell us a bit more about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance.
So the Wellbeing Economy Alliance we're fashioning it as a sort of a 10-year project, if you like. It's a global alliance of organizations, individuals who have come together with the express aim of catalyzing systems change towards this kind of realization of a well-being goal, but by doing so through unprecedented cooperation between actors working in their areas at different levels of the system. So it's that real idea of collaboration, a sort of uber collaboration, if you like. It certainly didn't come out of the blue. It sort of stands on the shoulders of existing efforts who decided to sort of pool their efforts and come together. And since actually it's been around the past 3 years, we've actually seen various other initiatives have sort of spawned, and there is a recognition that there is a need for this greater collaboration, if you like. I remember one time I was doing a storytelling session for an organization about We All, and I used the analogy of parallel play, because if you look at children sort of below the age of 3 or so, you'll see they're happily playing next to each other, but not actually interacting with each other. And in many respects, in the sort of progressive economic space, that has been what has been happening, in that people have been pushing forward, doing their own things, but without that sort of coherence to the overall, it's been perhaps less impactful than it could be.
So you're pulling people together. What other organizations are involved then?
I think the organization count at the moment stands at around 180, but it's quite a diverse range. I mean, we've had in recent months the first 2 public bodies, so Liverpool City Region Combined Authority and also North Ayrshire Council in Scotland have joined. Of course, there are the sort of think tanks that you would imagine would be a part of this family, the New Economics Foundation, the Club of Rome. But there are also other alliances such as the Capitals Coalition, GABV, the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, as well as Sistema B, which is the equivalent to B Corps, but in Latin America. And then, of course, there are indeed the governments of the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership, the five I mentioned before.
So you've produced a policy design guide. So explain to us what's actually in that. I mean, this tells politicians how to do it, right?
It's very much a how as opposed to a what. Yes, there are multiple case studies in this guide. However, it's not just giving them a smorgasbord of this is what you do, go off and do it. It's recognizing that it needs to be done differently. So it's a policy guide for how you do policy differently. And of course, it draws on a number of those principles that I mentioned before in terms of the 5 key approaches for a well-being economy, as well as providing case studies. And it's really at an exciting point, Tom, because we spent the past 12 months collaboratively creating this with a whole range of the We All family, the We All membership. And we're now at the point where we're looking to pilot it with policymakers and all of the necessary stakeholders in 4 locations around the world: California, Canada, Scotland, and New Zealand. So those are 4 locations where we have hubs, We All hubs.
What can we do about it? We the people. What can we do to make this change happen?
I mean, the first straight up thing anyone can do is to look to join We All. We All is a very broad family. It has the mantra of togetherness over agreement. You know, sometimes you'll find different organizations with quite different theories of change around how we change the economic system, but they recognize the power of being together rather than necessarily saying my approach is better than yours. And there's no transaction cost. There's simply a requirement that you share the vision and the values of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance to join it. Once you join it, and specifically the We All, if you're an individual, the We All Citizens, which is an online platform, it gives everyone the opportunity to connect with everyone else, learn about the different actions, collaborative opportunities that are taking place at the moment, and link in or hook up with them. You know, there's also a report I was thinking actually, which I read the other day, and it was called Building Better Systems. And it talked about the number of different roles that you can play in the systems change space. And I thought it was really interesting, some of them. I'll just mention them. Entrepreneurs are incredibly important for this systems change. There needs to be those who are pioneering new ways of doing things in order to show others that it is possible, and for that to multiply and for that to become the new normal. You might be inside an organization, You could be what this report calls an inside outsider. So you could be inside, but the way you act or the ideas that you bring into your organization, you could bring them in from outside, starting sort of change from sort of an entrepreneurial sort of spirit, if you like. Conveners, which is a large part of what the Wellbeing Economy Alliance does, bringing people together to make those connections. You're not always certain what will come of those connections, but unless you provide that space, those connections won't happen. There's a whole range, if you like. I mean, also through to investors, to consumers, exiters as well. You know, there are certain industries which will need to be sunsetted as we move towards a well-being economy, and particularly, of course, as we move towards net zero carbon. So helping those industries sort of exit, and you might be a public servant or you might be within those industries, but people within them are needed to help them move out of the picture, as you like, and particularly help people maybe working in those industries transition across to some of the new that's coming. So there's many different roles you can play, but joining WeAll is a very simple first step, and it'll sort of provide people with a range of sort of avenues and opportunities to explore with others.
Say I'm a world leader or community leader, and I get you in and say, Michael, what 3 things can I do to make this change happen? What would your advice be?
It would absolutely depend where that person sat, what decision-making powers they have, who are their stakeholders. If they were a business person, I might guide them towards the business of well-being, which is our guide to the alternative to business as usual. If they're a policymaker, I might look to work with them or support them with our policy design guide. If they were a citizen, I would encourage them to go to the citizens' website and look and see whether or not there might be a WeAll hub in their locality which they can join. Because WeAll hubs in different places around the world are in effect sort of manifestations of WeAll, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, but focused in on a particular area. So far they exist in Scotland, Canada, California. They're nascent ones, but coming up in Australia, but there's one in New Zealand. There's also ones that we're looking to get off the ground in Latin America and Africa. So, you know, these are fantastic spaces, but it depends, as I said, what that person's energy, interests, and where in the system they sit. Because, as I said, we look to act as the arrows between the players and the layers. Depending where they sit, we could instantly look to connect them to others that perhaps they haven't traditionally connected with, and provide opportunities to do things differently.
Well, that's great, Michael. Thank you very much for those insights, and let's hope that we can make change happen, and the work you're doing will actually get more impact and make people realise things can change.
Thank you, Tom. And I mean, yeah, hopefully so. I mean, it's only been 3 years, but there's been sort of tremendous interest and enthusiasm for this, and I think it's because, you know, this is not trying to be, this organization, a network of networks. It's looking to sort of underpin the efforts of others and amplify. So we'll give real oxygen to those solutions that already exist. It's the members that are sort of forging, the WeAll members that are forging forward with particular solutions. Our job is to sort of get all of those arrows and create, in effect, a sort of coherent whole to them without squashing them together, but showing that there is a sort of a consistency in terms of the message, and also where we're all pointing in the right direction. So no, thank you for inviting me on. And a simple link, as I said already, you can join WeAll. Well, all you have to do is type in weall.org. It's as simple as that, the URL, and then you can explore making connections via that website.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for your time, Michael, and wish you all the best with that.
Thanks for having me on your podcast, Tom. Cheers.
So can we have it all? That's a growth in economy that does not damage the environment and provides prosperity for all. Well, if we focus on growth in well-being and not just economic growth, then we can. But it takes a big shift in traditional thinking and a strong, compassionate leadership that believes this is the right thing to do, as we have seen in New Zealand. Now, it can happen anywhere in the world, but it needs the political will. But only by working together can we make this positive change happen. What do you think? Contact us at info@realagendaradio.org or Twitter @realagendanet or via our website realagenda.org. So what's up next on the Real Agenda Network? Well, there's some great shows starting soon. There's Across the Benches with Gavin Esler, where MPs of different parties discuss what they have in common. And this series is produced by Compassion in Politics. Plus a new series called From Here to Prosperity, which is an update on my 2016 book of the same name, which is about exactly what it says on the cover, and is available from all good bookshops. And special thanks to our sponsors, Switch, the workstation for your browser. Do you find yourself with too many tabs open and losing your place? Well, try switchextension.com. Free to download, save yourself time. I do, and it's great. Now, there's always plenty to choose from on the Real Agenda Network. We offer a range of shows on this channel, including podcasts from Compass, Compassion in Politics, Extinction Rebellion, Institute of Public Policy Research, New Economics Foundation, the Equality Trust, Tax Justice Network, Taxpayers Against Poverty, and Unlock Democracy. Now, one thing is certain, people want to see change to a more compassionate and just society, as well as more courageous politicians prepared to do the right thing for people over party. It's not happening, but it can. It's urgent, and it's up to us to make it happen. Because that's the real agenda. I'm Tom Burgess. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.